Communist Party threat. We are very united as senators on this topic, and that's really important for our allies to hear, and more importantly, it's really important for the dictator in Beijing to hear. We're very united, and it's going to stay that way because of the nature of the regime. So what we need to be doing is bringing all instruments of American power and American policy to address the Chinese Communist Party challenge. That's military, that's energy, that's technology, that's our private sector, that's our commitment to liberty and democracy. By the way, one of their biggest vulnerabilities is Xi Jinping fears his own people, right? That's why they don't allow TikTok to be seen in China. So I think this is a really important bill that fits one of the elements of our strategy on the tech side, particularly what they're doing to our citizens. Let me just give you one example. This might be a crazy notion, and if it is, you can dismiss it. But I'm a little curious. We have this big project. Some of you might hear that it's called the Willow Project in Alaska. It's a big energy project. We're trying to get it approved at the very high levels of the Biden administration. One of the things the Chinese fear more than anything in terms of our power is American energy. You read the reporting, Xi Jinping is scared to death of American energy dominance. TikTok in the last week has had over 300 million views relating to stopping this project. Whoa. Okay, maybe that's the good work of some of the lower 48 environmental groups, but maybe that's the Chinese Communist Party trying to influence young Americans on an issue that, in my view, is really, really important for our country and will strengthen our country. Something you might want to look into. I'm very curious about it myself. But the nature of this regime, the Chinese Communist Party regime, as Senator Thune said, is to lie. And we need to be aware of that. And this legislation really, really, I think, is an important bipartisan step to address a huge challenge that we face with regard to China right now. And now I want to call on Senator Baldwin.
Well, good afternoon, and to my colleagues, it is absolutely great to be up here with such a strong bipartisan group. We know that technology is changing rapidly, and Americans are increasingly using it to share our lives, promote our businesses, to stay connected. And every member up here uses technology to better connect with our constituents and serve the people we represent in our home states. And while these powerful tools have lots of benefits, in recent years we've seen companies owned by or controlled by our adversaries grow rapidly with little oversight and no transparency. Of course, a recent example is ByteDance, the Chinese technology company that owns TikTok. But the scope of this problem is far wider than one single company. While many of these technologies and platforms are popular, especially with our young people, we also know these products have the potential to endanger American users and threaten our entire national security. When it comes to platforms and products owned by foreign adversaries like the CCP, there is next to no transparency for users about where their data is being stored and what the information is being used for. That's why I'm proud to join my Democratic and Republican colleagues to introduce the Restrict Act to help our government protect Americans' data from foreign adversaries and to keep our country safe. This bipartisan legislation will empower us to respond to our changing media environment, giving the United States the tools that it needs to assess the threat of foreign-owned technology and, where appropriate, to take steps to restrict access. This legislation will give the United States authority to deal with today's foreign-owned tech companies, platforms, and products, while also establishing the infrastructure to address new and emerging foreign-owned products that could pose a threat in the future. Social media and technology, when used responsibly, They are powerful tools that can connect users, help folks start or grow their small businesses, and broaden horizons. But this is not always the case, and it's our job to ensure reasonable guardrails are in place to protect public safety, especially when it comes to foreign-owned entities that could weaponize Americans' data. What do I mean by weaponizing Americans' data? Through surveillance, identity theft, intellectual property theft, to name just a few examples. This legislation takes that common sense step forward to protect Wisconsinites and Americans online from social media and tech giants owned by foreign adversaries. And with that, I want to welcome to the microphone Senator Moran.
Tammy, thank you. Well, I'm pleased to be here in support of the Restrict Act. I thank my current chairman, Senator Warner, on the Intelligence Committee, and my former chairman on the Commerce Committee for their leadership in putting this legislation together and to bringing a group of serious senators to the table to see that we accomplish something. I'm hoping that this is the moment in which we do something in the United States Senate besides spending days, months, almost years doing confirmations. I'm more concerned about the future of our country now than I've ever been. That in part is because we need to pull together as a nation to defeat the adversarial forces that are about to create difficulties, challenges, and in fact the existential future of our country. We face tremendous challenges in this world, and it used to be that if we worried and took care of our military stance, that was sufficient. Today it's important, but it's not sufficient. And our economy and certainly our access to our privacy, to our information becomes critical in this world we live in. Foreign adversary infiltration into our information and communication systems are a serious and growing challenge. These threats are not new, and they're not going away. The Department of Commerce needs the tools to review, to prevent, to mitigate, and really to prevent harmful products and services from continuing into tomorrow. Personal data and conversations must be out of the reach of the influence of the Chinese Communist Party. And I would say that I would welcome any of my colleagues behind me and my other colleagues in the United States Senate to rejoin our efforts that started a number of years ago to pass a comprehensive data privacy piece of legislation in a bipartisan way. This bill is a component of that privacy and a component of our national security, but we still desperately need to take on this issue in a broader way. And while we've come close, we have fallen short. The issue hasn't disappeared, and we need to pass serious and appropriate data privacy legislation in addition to the Restrict Act. Again, I thank my colleagues for the chance to join them and to be supportive, and I look forward to seeing this bill across the finish line.
Thank you, Jerry. 2 quick points, and then I'll start to take questions. We're going to restrict questions to this topic, and if anybody's got to sign off, I get it. One, and this was a point that Senator Romney made, but it really is important to repeat. Our beef here is with the Communist Party of China. It is not with the Chinese people. It is not with the Chinese diaspora. It is sure as heck not with Chinese Americans. And failure to make that point, frankly, plays into the propaganda agenda that oftentimes you see on WeChat and other Chinese-based apps. Second, those of us on the Intel Committee tomorrow are going to have the leadership of the intelligence community before us. And one of the things I think you're going to hear is that the traditional definition of national security, who's got the most tanks, guns, planes, and ships, which clearly is still critically important as we see the battle between Ukraine and Russia play out. But increasingly is also who wins the struggle for technology dominance. You know, the Congress in a bipartisan way recognized that around semiconductors, chips. We recognize that around the threat that Huawei placed. And this broad-based, rules-based approach, I think, will give us the tool, again, focused on those 6 nations that by law have been determined adversarial to take on these technology tools. So,
Senator, just a 2-part question for you. I take it you think a bunch of straight bans, or they seek to empower the president to ban this app, won't pass court muster. And then just separately for any of you, so many of you, Senator Manchin, you especially, just you've talked about how many people use this app. So just practically, how do you put the genie back in the
Well,
bottle?
let me do two or three quick things. One, nothing in this bill, if passed, would authorize any government action going after any individual user. Let me be clear on that. There are ways, and again, Senator Bennett had suggested you could limit the sale on app stores, but this is, if this bill becomes law, there's nobody individually is going to be held accountable. Secondly, one of the things, again, that Senator Thune emphasized, we want to make sure that we didn't invite other countries retaliating against the United States. So the idea of having a rules-based process that identifies types of technologies, we think will stand up better in court muster. And let me acknowledge as well that when we're talking about social media-based apps, whether they are foreign or domestic, there's a higher level of scrutiny. So we've listened to the outside legal experts on that issue. And I do think there are, Senator Thune and I, for example, have got legislation along with Senator Fisher on dark patterns. Some of these practices that frankly are used by American companies. We're focused today on foreign-based, but I'll let Joe answer if he wants or John answer if he wants, but I think there will be plenty of video-based, American-based applications that this bill would not affect at all. Do you want to add to that? Please.
So it seems like China, it's very obvious that China feels like they're taking a lot of heat from Congress. What you guys are doing, as well as what's happening on the House side with regards to the COVID origins, they'll just pass the bill to release that intel. So China's foreign minister just said that if the U.S. doesn't hit the brake and continues to speed down the wrong path, no amount of guardrails will prevent derailing and will surely be conflicts and confrontations. Do any of you have a reaction to this?
I'll let again my colleagues talk about that. I'll just point out this. $500 billion a year of intellectual property theft. For years, use of entities called the Confucius Institutes at many universities that were used to prey upon Chinese exchange students. In the case of TikTok, constant examples, even with the statements of TikTok that somehow Chinese engineers are not getting access to that American data, they are. And we have seen an authoritarian regime that literally changed Chinese law in 2016 that requires that any company based in China, their number one responsibility is not to their customers, not to their shareholders, it is to the Communist Party of China. That is a very different system than what we have in this country, for all the flaws of our system.
I would just say one thing on this. The foreign minister, if he would just basically evaluate what he's allowing American companies to do in his country and see if it makes common sense that we should do the same, and why he should be upset about us taking the actions we're taking. That's all.
And again, many of the American platform companies have already been banned in China. And I would also point out just one other thing. This is not on, not a lot of talk about TikTok here. Canada's taken this action. The EU's taken this action. India banned TikTok years ago. Yeah.
Senator, on TikTok specifically, there is an ongoing security review that the White House and the agencies are doing under CFIUS. Last week, there was a hearing in House Foreign Affairs Committee where Democrats in particular suggested any legislation like this should wait until that process has played out. Was that discussion, did you guys have that discussion about CFIUS? And if so, why did you guys?
One, I can assure you that I've had some very positive conversations with House Democratic colleagues who I think are very interested in supporting this approach. Two, I think you'll see shortly a statement from the administration embracing this approach. Three, okay, well, it's good timing then. Three, this is ancillary to CFIUS. CFIUS is still a process. We've got a safe harbor of CFIUS acts first. But CFIUS requires a transaction to trigger its tools. It doesn't deal at all with something that an enterprise, a foreign-based technology enterprise that might just enter the market without a transaction.
And really quickly, if you,
Well, we scared them right off already? Okay.
my understanding is that this bill will give the president additional authority, maybe get rid of some of the Berman Amendment things, to ban something like TikTok. I don't think it actually requires a ban.
No, this gives the Secretary of Commerce a series of tools to mitigate, divest, up to and including banning.
Will you guys be disappointed if the administration?
Listen, I think and again, I think Senator Manchin made this, and I'm not sure whether his granddaughters are going to be pleased him talking about them in front of y'all, but this is a popular application. I think it's going to be incumbent upon the government, to show its cards in terms of how this is a threat. I mean, I remember for years we would, some of us, my old friend Richard Burr and I, would go around and try to talk to our allies and, frankly, American telecom companies about the challenges Huawei presented. We didn't disclose and declassify enough of the intel, and consequently, we've had with leadership of people like Senator Wicker to go out and have to spend taxpayer dollars to rip and replace that equipment because it was a national security threat, but we weren't forthcoming enough early on. You want to add anything?
No, I think that's right.
Joe?
Here we go. It wasn't just the Chinese foreign minister, it was also China's President Xi Jinping today who said that the U.S. was trying to suppress China. I mean, in the wake of this, the Chinese spy balloon, what you all have learned about TikTok, what's your message to the Chinese president?
Well, my message is our economies are inexorably tied, and there are certain areas we're going to have to collaborate. But the idea of China having a win at all costs in terms of technology domination, China's actions in the South China Seas. I just came back from a trip to India where there are Chinese troops massed on the Indian border at a level that's extraordinarily aggressive. Chinese investment in technology domain after technology domain. This is the competition of this century. And again, I think Senator Manchin probably said it, and again, I'll ask Jerry or John if they want to add on to this. Look at how Chinese enterprises have treated joint ventures with not just American, but other European. The requirement of moving the intellectual property over. This theft of intellectual property doesn't just go against America, it goes against a number of nations. The whole notion that many of us operated, and I was part of this, in the beginning of the 20th century, is the more you bring China into the WTO and the international order, the more it will adhere to international rules and norms. It just hasn't proven to be the case. Guys, do you want to?
Said it well. Yeah. No, I just think Mark's point is the right one, and that is that, if you're doing business in China, your number one allegiance has to be to the CCP. We have a free market economy. We have a Constitution, a Bill of Rights, and the rule of law. And so when we go about a process like this, it has to be orderly. It has to be a way that can withstand legal challenge. And we think that this does that rather than, picking out, kind of hand-picking. We talked about this earlier, the whack-a-mole strategy of this particular technology or this particular company. This creates something that I think complements what CFIUS does and gets at the heart of the matter, and that is the fact that China, through their technology, is stealing Americans' data and their information. And of course, as we know, their administration lies on a daily basis. So I think the message is, yes, we have a symbiotic relationship with China when it comes to our two economies, but that has to be conducted in an open, transparent way in which we have an opportunity to determine whether or not they are not playing by the rules. And I think this process enables that to happen.
And again, we just point out as well, remember that one of the first examples of this wasn't even a Chinese entity. It was Kaspersky Software, which was Russian-based, and literally took us years to get it off the GSA acquisition list. Please.
Mr. Chairman, is there any provision in your legislation that would prevent predatory data brokers from collecting information here in the U.S. and then sending it to a foreign entity?
Great question. By expanding the definition of ICTS, or in terms of telecom and communications-related entities, I think a number of us are concerned about that predatory activity, but there would have to be that rules-based process that Commerce Department would have to show how usage of that data and potentially turning it over to an adversarial nation, China or otherwise, would be a national security risk. I think the case could be made, but that would be part of the process. Please.
The Commerce Secretary indicated in an interview, I think it was about a month ago or so, about TikTok specifically, that banning it would be a politically unpopular thing to do with young people. I wonder if you worry at all about any of your colleagues in the Senate or in the House making a political calculation and voting against this type of legislation because young people won't.
Politics in the Congress?
They won't be happy with it.
Well,
Is that a legitimate concern?
people will have to make their own decision. Setting up a rules-based process to go after foreign technology that interferes with our national security. And I think when we see the case that it's already made, when we see the amount of data that TikTok says they protect, and frankly, story after story where it's not protected, I will trust that the vast majority of us, regardless of party, will do the right thing. And I would never underestimate the ability of American technology to provide like-kind products with better protections. We'll take just a couple more, please.
You mentioned how ingrained TikTok is in American society, particularly among young people. There are a number of your colleagues who still use TikTok here on Capitol Hill. Lots of elected officials across the country also use it. They say it's to reach younger audiences and everything. What is your message to them, those of your colleagues who are still using it?
Well, first of all, there's a lot of creative activity on TikTok. It has been a very effective tool for people to gain prominence as social influencers. I'm not by any means decrying that everything on TikTok is somehow bad. It's not. But we've got two challenges that I think is one of the reasons why the CFIUS process has taken so long and why these tools could be useful is you got 100 million Americans, 90 minutes a day, the potential for that American data combined with things like data brokers, to end up being residing someplace in Beijing, and the ability of the CCP to manipulate the kind of videos. I don't know what Senator Sullivan talked about, but if that proves to be the case, I do know that there is a, not by the name of TikTok, but there is a variation on TikTok that is shown to Chinese youth and emphasizes science, education, work hard, be a patriot. Not so much for our kids. So, I think this has been moving quickly. And I think everybody, again, it was 2 years ago, or roughly 2 years, the military banned it. Around Christmas that the Senate took, unanimous action. I think the House took virtually unanimous action as well. So I think this is something that we're all getting educated along the process. Last question.
What would you say to the millions of Americans who use this app every day and say they have a right to use it and that this would ban or violate their First Amendment rights?
What I'd say is there is a higher level standard on social media apps. So we have to demonstrate, or the administration would have to demonstrate, that data is being stored and potentially utilized by the CCP. And there have been plenty of press reports where TikTok engineers have actually targeted individual journalists or data has been found, or the potential in terms of the manipulation of the videos that could end up being an agent of propaganda or malign influence. We made similar type judgments in terms of Russian interference in 2016. I think the vast majority of Americans, when they fully understand the potential threat, will do the right thing.
What's the limit here to using national security to shut down any app the government wants?
Well, again, we have a limit that is coming, communication technologies coming from 6 designated countries, a rules-based process, a requirement that the IC, as much as possible, without giving up sources and methods, would disclose the reasons why the government would reach a conclusion. So it's not just trust us, it's look at the data. And again, I'll end where I started, which is we've seen this play out with Huawei, with ZTE. We've seen it as we now go into the competition around artificial intelligence and quantum computing, synthetic biology, advanced energy. I absolutely believe that China, with its authoritarian values dominating those technologies, is not in the national security interest of our country, or for that matter, people across the world who don't live in authoritarian regimes. Thank you all very much. I'm sure we'll have more to say later.
Time for one more, sir, about the White House?
guys, you